The night was thick with heat, the kind that clings to your skin and makes the air feel heavier than it should. I was standing in the driveway, frozen, gripping the set of car keys Julia had just tossed at me with a casual flick of her wrist. Her words echoed in my ears, sharp and humiliating. "Why don't you take the car and cool off, huh? Or are you going to stand there sulking like a child all night?" It wasn't just the words, it was the look she gave me, a mix of contempt and amusement, like she was watching an actor flub his lines in a play. Around us, her family swirled in the glow of string lights and laughter, oblivious to the knife she'd just twisted into my chest. I wasn't sulking. I was furious. The night had already taken a turn for the worse before that moment. Julia's little game had started hours earlier at the family reunion. It was subtle at first, a snide comment here, a dismissive glance there, but it escalated fast. By the time dessert was served, she was holding court by the fire pit, her voice loud enough to silence the hum of conversation. "Obedience," she scoffed, swirling her wine as though the word itself was something foul. "That's for women who have nothing better to do with their lives. Not for me. Not ever." The crowd laughed, but she wasn't done. "And honestly, men who expect it. Pathetic." That last part was a dagger aimed directly at me. The room erupted in more laughter, but all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't say a word, I didn't trust myself to. I knew her family, knew how quick they were to side with her in these little performances. Anything I said would be turned into another punchline. I played along, keeping my face neutral while my insides churned. Her father clapped me on the back. "Tough crowd, huh?" he joked. I smiled weakly, but my mind was racing. What was she doing? Why now? Why this? Julia had always been sharp-tongued, but this felt different, deliberate, cruel in a way that didn't match the Julia I thought I knew. For months, I'd felt a shift between us, something subtle but undeniable. She'd grown more distant, more secretive. Late-night phone calls she claimed were work emergencies. A new password on her phone. The sudden, inexplicable need to get more space. And now this. I gripped the keys tighter, my knuckles white as I stood there in the driveway, the laughter from the backyard fading into a dull hum behind me. I wasn't sure what was boiling in my chest, rage, humiliation, or something darker. And then, as I stood there, something caught my eye, Julia, just inside the house, standing by the patio door. She was on her phone, smiling. But not just smiling, smirking, a private kind of grin that didn't belong to the woman who had just ripped me apart in front of 30 people. The air seemed to shift around me, heavy and charged. I felt my stomach drop. There was something in that smile that felt like a slap in the face, a silent confirmation of every suspicion I'd tried to bury for months. I wasn't going to let it go this time. I slipped the keys into my pocket and turned back toward the house. I had no idea what I'd find, but I knew one thing, I wasn't leaving until I had answers. I walked back into the house, the laughter and chatter from the backyard muffled as the sliding door clicked shut behind me. The air inside felt cooler, quieter, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing in my chest. Julia was still standing near the patio doors, her phone pressed to her ear now, her back turned to me. Her voice was low, almost playful, a tone I hadn't heard in months. "Don't worry about it," she said, a soft laugh slipping through her words. "He's too dense to notice anything. It's fine. Trust me." I froze, my mind scrambling to process what I'd just heard. My pulse pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else, but her words kept looping in my head. "He's too dense to notice." I stayed rooted in place, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, waiting for her to say something, anything, that might offer a shred of innocence. But there was no innocence in the way she laughed again, light and airy, as if she didn't have a care in the world. "No, I'm not leaving yet," she continued. "I'll text you when I'm on my way. Just don't be stupid, okay?" I felt my jaw clench so tightly it hurt. Her words were laced with familiarity, intimacy, the kind you don't use with coworkers or casual friends. Then she turned slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her reflection in the glass. Her smile was wide, her eyes sparkling with a kind of joy that used to belong to me. But now it was a stranger's joy, shared with someone else. I couldn't stand there any longer. I stepped forward, the sound of my shoes on the hardwood loud enough to make her spin around. Her face dropped the second she saw me, the grin wiped clean, replaced by a mask of indifference. "Oh," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "What are you doing inside? I thought you'd gone to cool off." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my gaze dropping to the phone in her hand, which she quickly slipped into her back pocket like it was a guilty secret. "What's the matter?" she asked, tilting her head in that condescending way she always used when she thought she was in control. "Who were you talking to?" My voice came out steadier than I expected, but it carried an edge that even she couldn't ignore. Julia scoffed, rolling her eyes as she brushed past me toward the kitchen. "Oh, don't start," she said, her tone dismissive. "It was work stuff. You wouldn't understand." I followed her, my footsteps echoing against the tile floor. "Work stuff?" I repeated, my voice rising just enough to make her glance back at me, her brows knitting together in irritation. "Yes, work stuff," she snapped, reaching for a glass of wine like we were having a casual conversation about the weather. "What's with the interrogation? Jesus, can you not embarrass yourself even more tonight?" I didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, watching her as she sipped her wine like nothing had happened. "You told them I was too dense to notice anything," I said, each word deliberate, like a bullet loaded into a chamber. Her hand froze mid-air, the glass hovering just inches from her lips. For a split second, her face betrayed her, a flicker of panic, quickly masked by a defiant smirk. "You were eavesdropping," she said, her voice dripping with accusation, as though I were the one at fault. "Wow. That's low, even for you." I took a step closer, the space between us crackling with tension. "Don't turn this around on me, Julia. Who were you talking to?" She set the glass down with a clink, her smirk hardening into a glare. "It's none of your business," she said, crossing her arms. "And honestly, you need to stop acting like some paranoid lunatic. It's embarrassing." I felt my control slipping, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "It is my business," I said, my voice sharper now. "I'm your husband, or have you forgotten that?" Her laugh was bitter, a sound that felt like nails scraping against my skull. "Oh, please," she said, throwing her arms up in exasperation. "Don't play the wounded husband routine with me. It's pathetic." For a moment, the room felt impossibly small, the walls pressing in on me. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. The anger, the humiliation, it all solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out, leaving her standing there with that defiant look on her face. But as I stepped outside into the night, I wasn't retreating. I was planning. I drove in silence that night, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The dim glow of the dashboard cast shadows on my face, but my thoughts were far darker. Julia's words, her dismissive tone, her smug grin, they replayed in my mind like a broken record. She thought she was untouchable. That I was some fool to be manipulated and mocked. She had no idea what was coming. When we got home, she didn't waste time continuing her act. She slipped off her heels and tossed her purse onto the counter, acting like nothing had happened. "I'm going to bed," she said casually, not even sparing me a glance. "Try not to wake me up with your brooding." Her arrogance was like gasoline on a fire. I stayed downstairs, pacing the living room as the weight of the evening pressed down on me. The anger burned, but beneath it, something else was stirring, determination. I couldn't confront her with nothing but suspicions. She'd twist it, manipulate it, turn it into another way to make me look like the bad guy. No, I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. That's when I remembered the tablet. It was an older model, something we rarely used anymore, but it was still linked to her email and social accounts. She'd forgotten about it, or maybe she thought I was too dense to remember it was there, tucked away in the drawer of the side table. I grabbed it, my hands trembling as I powered it on. The screen lit up, and after a few moments of waiting for the apps to sync, her inbox popped open. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the messages, my stomach tightening with every subject line that seemed out of place. Most were mundane, work emails, subscription updates, but then I saw it. A thread with the subject line, "Last night was incredible." The sender? A name I didn't recognize, but my gut told me everything I needed to know. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the message, as if opening it would somehow make everything worse. But I had to know. I tapped on the email, and the words staring back at me made my blood run cold. "I can't stop thinking about you," it began, the casual intimacy of the message like a slap in the face. It went on to describe a night I hadn't been part of, details spilling out like poison. There was no mistaking what this was. No room for doubt. I kept scrolling, reading through the thread, each message confirming what I'd already suspected. Her replies were just as damning, filled with inside jokes, flirtation, and plans for their next meeting. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the nights she'd claimed to be working late or out with friends. My hands were shaking now, not with anger, but with something colder. Betrayal. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't something she could explain away. She had lied to me, humiliated me, and done so with a level of cruelty I couldn't wrap my head around. But then, as I scrolled to the most recent message, something caught my eye, a line that made my breath catch in my throat. "Tomorrow will be tricky with the reunion, but I'll find a way to sneak away. Just be patient." The reunion. Tonight. She'd been planning to meet him tonight, under my nose, while I stood there like an idiot playing the dutiful husband. My jaw tightened as the realization hit me. This wasn't just about her mocking words at the reunion. She had been flaunting her betrayal right in front of me, daring me to catch her, knowing I wouldn't. But she was wrong. I set the tablet down, my mind already racing with possibilities. Confronting her now would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be enough. Not for me. She had spent months tearing me down, treating me like a joke. It was my turn to play the game, and I wasn't going to lose. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smug grin, heard her mocking laughter, and read those damning words over and over again. "Tomorrow will be tricky with the reunion, but I'll find a way to sneak away." She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd made a mockery of me, boldly and publicly. That was the part that stung the most. I wasn't just her husband anymore, I was her punchline. And the worst part? Everyone at that reunion had laughed along with her. But no more. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, my mind was set. Confronting her wasn't enough, I needed her to feel the same humiliation, the same powerlessness that she had made me feel. And I already had a plan forming. I started with the tablet, going back through her messages and taking screenshots of everything. Every flirtatious email, every plan they'd made to meet, every sordid detail that painted the full picture of her betrayal. I didn't just want to know what she'd done, I wanted to control the narrative. Then I moved to her social media. I wasn't looking for anything public, Julia was far too clever for that, but her DMs told a different story. The same man from the emails popped up again, his messages full of the same nauseating affection. But what really caught my attention was the other messages. Julia wasn't just hiding one affair. She had a pattern, a history of flirty, borderline inappropriate conversations with multiple men. And in every thread, there was the same dismissive attitude toward me. She called me boring, predictable, even an accessory. The more I uncovered, the more I realized the woman I thought I knew didn't exist. The Julia I married, the one who used to smile at me like I was her whole world, that woman was gone. By the time she woke up and stumbled into the kitchen, still groggy and oblivious, I had all the ammunition I needed. "Morning," she said, yawning as she reached for the coffee pot. She didn't even glance at me. "You're up early." I stared at her, my chest tight with the effort it took to stay calm. "Yeah," I said evenly, "couldn't sleep." She poured herself a cup, still acting like nothing was wrong. "Well, maybe try to relax today," she said, her tone dripping with fake concern. "You've been so tense lately. It's not a good look." I gritted my teeth, forcing a smile. "You're right," I said. "I should take it easy. Maybe catch up on some emails." The comment didn't faze her. She didn't know I had seen everything yet. The day dragged on, every minute a test of my patience as she went about her routine, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. By the time evening rolled around, I knew she was preparing to leave. She dressed carefully, spritzed on her favorite perfume, and checked her phone more times than I could count. "Heading out?" I asked casually as she slipped on her heels. "Yeah," she said, her voice light. Girls' night. Don't wait up. Girls' night. I almost laughed at the audacity. Instead, I nodded, watching her grab her purse and head out the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and followed. I had no idea where she was going, not at first, but she didn't make it hard to figure out. She wasn't careful, she wasn't trying to hide. She drove to a small boutique hotel on the edge of town, pulling into the lot like she belonged there. I parked far enough away to avoid being noticed but close enough to watch her as she stepped out of the car, her confidence radiating even from a distance. And then I saw him. A tall, well-dressed man stepping out of the hotel lobby to meet her. She walked straight into his arms, laughing as he pulled her close. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a spectacle. She hadn't just cheated on me, she'd built an entire performance around it. But this time, I wasn't the fool standing on the sidelines. I pulled out my phone and started recording. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about turning the tables, about making sure she couldn't manipulate her way out of this. As they disappeared into the hotel, I leaned back in my seat, the weight of what I'd just witnessed sinking in. My hands were steady now, my resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Julia had been playing a game, but she was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't just a pawn. I was the one flipping the board. I sat in the car, watching the hotel entrance like a hawk, the dim glow of the parking lot lights casting shadows over the scene. My mind wasn't racing anymore, it was sharp, focused, cold. Julia thought she'd won, walking into that hotel like she was untouchable. She didn't know I was outside, holding the kind of evidence that could shatter her world. But I wasn't here just to watch. Tonight wasn't just about catching her in the act, it was about setting the stage for what came next. I opened my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. Her parents' number stared back at me, their names glowing on the screen. It would have been so easy to hit call, to tell them their perfect daughter was far from the woman they thought she was. But that wasn't my move. Not yet. Instead, I dialed someone else, her best friend, Caroline. Caroline had always been sharp, the type who could sniff out drama from a mile away. She and Julia had been close for years, but I'd noticed a shift recently. Caroline's texts to Julia had grown shorter, her visits less frequent. There was tension between them, and I was about to use it. "Hey, it's me," I said when she picked up, keeping my voice steady. "I need your help." There was a pause, and then a cautious, "What's going on?" "I think Julia's cheating on me," I said bluntly. "And before you hang up or tell me I'm wrong, I have proof." Another pause, this one longer. Then she let out a sharp breath. "You're serious?" "As serious as it gets," I replied. "She's with him right now. A hotel just outside town. I'm sitting in the parking lot." Caroline didn't respond right away, but I could hear the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she said, "What do you want from me?" "I need someone to back me up. Someone who knows her well enough to see what I'm seeing. You've been distant with her lately, I know you've noticed things too." She sighed. "You're not wrong. She's been different. But you're really asking me to get involved in this?" "Yes," I said simply. "You don't owe her anything after the way she's treated you." That struck a nerve. I could hear it in the way her breath hitched, the subtle shift in her tone when she finally said, "Give me the address. I'm on my way." As I hung up, a grim satisfaction settled over me. Caroline wasn't just backup, she was the key to unraveling Julia's carefully crafted image. If anyone could help me expose her, it was someone who had been close enough to see the cracks. About 30 minutes later, Caroline pulled into the lot, her car screeching to a halt next to mine. She stepped out, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "All right," she said, crossing her arms. "Where is she?" I pointed to the hotel entrance. "Room 214. I saw them go in about an hour ago." She shook her head, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Unbelievable. And you're sure it's—" I handed her my phone, showing her the video I'd taken of Julia embracing the man. Caroline's face twisted with anger as she watched. "She's disgusting," she muttered. "I always knew she was self-absorbed, but this—" "Let's go," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I need you there when this goes down." We walked into the hotel together, the air-conditioned lobby a stark contrast to the suffocating heat outside. The receptionist barely glanced at us as we strode past, our determination making us invisible. The elevator ride was silent, tense, every second stretching into eternity. When we reached the second floor, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. We stopped in front of room 214. I knocked, sharp and loud. No hesitation. No retreat. There was a shuffle inside, muffled voices, and then the door opened a crack. Julia stood there, wrapped in a hotel robe, her hair slightly disheveled. The look on her face when she saw me was worth every second of pain she'd caused. Shock. Fear. And then, as she spotted Caroline standing behind me, pure rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but trembling. "Catching you in the act," I said coldly, pushing the door open wider. Behind her, the man from the lobby stood frozen, his face pale, still buttoning his shirt. Julia stepped in front of me, blocking my view. "You've lost your mind," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is insane. You're insane." "No," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "Insane is thinking you could humiliate me, betray me, and walk away without consequences." Her eyes darted to Caroline, who was glaring at her like she wanted to spit fire. "And you?" Julia spat. "What are you even doing here? This isn't your business." Caroline stepped forward, her voice icy. "It became my business when you started treating everyone around you like trash. This is on you." Julia's mask of control cracked, her face twisting into something ugly. "You think this changes anything?" she sneered. "You think you're going to come out of this looking like the hero? No one's going to believe you. No one." I leaned in, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "I don't need them to believe me. I just need them to see the truth. And trust me, they will." Her defiance faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. She knew what I had, the messages, the video, the evidence. And for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes, fear. Julia stood frozen, her fear flickering into something more primal, desperation. Her hands gripped the doorframe as if holding onto it might stop the avalanche she knew was coming. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, her voice trembling but still clinging to defiance. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, stepping into the room, forcing her to back up. Caroline followed close behind, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. The man, who'd been awkwardly standing by the bed, took a nervous step back, his face paling further. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, fixing my gaze on him. He stammered something incoherent, his eyes darting between Julia and me like a trapped animal. "Leave him out of this." Julia snapped, stepping in front of him like a shield. Her protective stance made my stomach turn, but I didn't let it show. "Oh, don't worry," I said, pulling out my phone. "He's already in it." I waved the screen in her face, the video of their embrace frozen mid-frame. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came out. "Let's make this simple," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "You're going to tell me the truth. All of it. Right here, right now. Or I'll make sure everyone in your life, your parents, your friends, even your coworkers, sees this video before you can blink." "You wouldn't dare," she spat, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Try me," I said, holding her gaze. "You've spent months mocking me, humiliating me. Did you really think I wouldn't fight back?" The man behind her finally found his voice, stammering, "Look, I didn't know she was married, okay? I didn't." "Save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "This isn't about you. This is between her and me." He glanced at Julia, his expression shifting to one of contempt. "You told me you were separated," he said, his voice growing louder. "You lied to me." Julia turned on him, her face twisting into a sneer. "Oh, grow up. You didn't care about the truth when you got what you wanted." Her venomous tone stunned him into silence, and for a moment, the room was filled with the tension of three people trapped in a storm of her making. Caroline stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've got nothing left, Julia. Just stop. We all see you for what you are now. Julia turned to her, her face darkening with rage. Oh, shut up, Caroline. You've always been jealous of me. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You couldn't stand being second best. Caroline laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Jealous? Of you? No, Julia. I feel sorry for you. You're so obsessed with tearing other people down, you don't even realize you've destroyed yourself. That hit a nerve. Julia's face twisted, her composure crumbling. You think you're better than me? You're just a bitter, lonely. Enough, I said, my voice loud and commanding, cutting through her tirade. You can insult everyone in this room, but it doesn't change the facts. You cheated. You lied. And now you're caught. Julia turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. So what? What are you going to do, huh? Post your little video online? Ruin both of us? Be my guest, because I promise you'll regret it just as much as I will. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile she was used to. It was cold, deliberate. Oh, no, Julia. I don't need to ruin myself to ruin you. There are far more creative ways to make sure you face the consequences. Her bravado faltered again, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're right about one thing, I said, stepping closer until I was inches from her face. This isn't just about revenge. This is about taking back control. And trust me, Julia, by the time I'm done, you'll wish all I did was post a video. Her breath hitched, her bravado finally breaking under the weight of my words. For the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't have a snide remark or a clever comeback. She just stood there, her face pale, her hands trembling. I turned to Caroline, who was watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. We're done here, I said, heading for the door. Let's go. As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Julia's world was already crumbling, and I had only just begun. Caroline and I walked out of the hotel, the door slamming shut behind us like the final punctuation on a bitter sentence. The night air was cool against my face, but it did nothing to dull the fire burning inside me. Julia thought she could claw her way out of this, manipulate and insult her way back into control. But she'd underestimated me, she didn't realize I'd stopped playing by her rules. As we reached the parking lot, Caroline let out a long breath, breaking the silence. So, what's your next move? She asked, her voice careful, as though she wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the question. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I unlocked my car and leaned against it, staring at the hotel's glowing sign in the distance. I'm going to end this on my terms, I finally said. But I need to be smart about it. Caroline nodded, folding her arms. She won't make it easy for you. You know that, right? She'll fight back. I gave a small, bitter laugh. Let her. She spent months turning me into her punching bag. It's time she learned what it feels like to be on the receiving end. As I drove home, the pieces of my plan began falling into place. Julia had always prided herself on her ability to manipulate, to charm, to keep everyone dancing to her tune. But now I had the sheet music. I had the emails, the messages, the video, and I knew exactly how to use them. The next morning, I woke early and began setting everything in motion. First, I forwarded the incriminating emails and messages to my private account, ensuring I had backups. Then I compiled everything into a neatly organized folder, complete with timestamps and screenshots. This wasn't just evidence, it was a story. A story Julia wouldn't be able to rewrite. But I wasn't stopping there. I reached out to a lawyer, one who specialized in divorce cases involving infidelity. I didn't want to just leave her, I wanted to ensure she had no room to twist the narrative in her favor. I wanted to hit her where it hurt the most, her reputation, her ego, her carefully constructed image. By midday, I was ready for the next phase. I sent a carefully worded email to her parents, attaching just enough of the evidence to shatter their illusions without overwhelming them. The subject line was simple: you need to know the truth. It wasn't about turning them against her, it was about exposing the reality she'd worked so hard to hide. Julia thrived on control, and by taking it away from her, I was forcing her to confront the chaos she'd created. Then, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, an old college friend who worked in corporate investigations. He owed me a favor, and I intended to collect. "I need you to dig up everything you can on this guy," I said, giving him the name of Julia's lover. "I don't care how small or insignificant it seems. I need leverage." The final piece of the puzzle was Caroline. That afternoon, we met at a quiet cafe, far from the prying eyes of anyone who might know us. Over coffee, I laid out my plan in detail. Her role was simple but crucial. She would be my witness, someone who could corroborate my story and validate the evidence. "You're really going through with this," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and disbelief. I nodded, my expression grim. "I have to. She's left me no choice." Caroline leaned back in her chair, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Good. She deserves everything that's coming." By the time I got home, the weight on my chest had begun to lift. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. Julia wasn't just going to face consequences, she was going to face the truth, the one thing she'd spent her life avoiding. That evening, as I sat in the living room, the sound of her car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt through me. The door opened, and she walked in, her heels clicking against the floor. She paused when she saw me sitting there, her expression wary. "What's with the look?" she asked, her voice sharp. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees. "We need to talk." She froze, her eyes narrowing. "If this is about last night." "It's about everything, Julia," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Your lies. Your affairs. Your constant need to tear me down." Her face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, here we go. The victim speech. Poor you." I held up my phone, the folder of evidence glowing on the screen. Her expression shifted in an instant, from anger to panic, then back to defiance. "What are you going to do with that?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. I stood, stepping closer until I was inches from her. "Whatever I have to," I said, my voice low and steady. "You've left me no choice, Julia. This ends now." For the first time, I saw it in her eyes, the realization that she was no longer in control. And in that moment, I knew I'd already won. Julia's mask of defiance finally cracked. Her eyes darted to the phone in my hand, then back to my face, her confidence unraveling with each passing second. "You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're pathetic." I didn't flinch. Her insults were nothing more than empty bullets now, stripped of the power they once held. "Pathetic?" I said, my tone calm but cutting. "That's rich, coming from someone who lied, cheated, and humiliated the one person who was stupid enough to believe in her." Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. Every move she'd made, every card she'd played, had been turned against her. "I've already sent the evidence," I continued. "To your parents, to my lawyer, and to a few people you might want to think twice about lying to." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "So, go ahead, Julia. Tell me how you're going to spin this. I'm curious." Her lips trembled, her hands clenched into fists. "You think this makes you better than me?" she spat. "You think anyone's going to care about your sob story? People like me always come out on top." I smiled faintly. "Not this time." The color drained from her face as the weight of her situation sank in. She'd spent years building her image, cultivating her power, and now it was crumbling before her eyes. And the best part? She had no one to blame but herself. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon. I suggest you start figuring out how to explain this to your parents, your friends, and whoever else you think you fooled." Her eyes widened in shock. You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said simply. "And trust me, Julia, this is the kind version. I could have destroyed you. I still can." For a moment, she looked like she might fight back, her mouth opening to unleash another tirade. But then she hesitated, the weight of her own guilt and the futility of her situation finally breaking through. "You're a coward," she said weakly, her voice lacking its usual venom. I shrugged. "Maybe. But I'm not the one who threw everything away for a cheap thrill." With that, I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't wait for her to respond, didn't care to hear her excuses or insults. She could choke on the wreckage of her own actions. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The pain was still there, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. It was fuel, pushing me forward, reminding me that I had survived the worst she could throw at me. Julia's voice echoed faintly from inside the house, angry and desperate, but it was nothing more than background noise now. She'd lost, and she knew it. I'd taken back control, not just of the situation but of my life. I got into my car, my phone buzzing with a message from Caroline, "Let me know if you need anything else." She got what she deserved. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house, the place that had once been my home, now just a reminder of everything I'd overcome. I wasn't leaving with anger, I was leaving with resolve. Julia had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she'd only freed me. I wasn't the fool she tried to make me. I was the man who walked away stronger, smarter, and ready to start again. This was the end of her game. And the beginning of my life without her.